Good evening, everyone. I have the misfortune of never having met Chuck Pettus. And I say that sincerely because had I known of him and what he was doing up on his hill in West Windsor, less than 5 or 6 miles away from where I lived in an old farm on the side of the hill with my husband and my son for almost the past 40 years. And it just bothers me that he was doing what he was doing up on that hill, and we weren't doing the same thing, but in a lot of ways we aspired to it. Living in the country, clean air, the ability to grow your own foods, to live a more simple life and relax and enjoy the things of nature around us. My husband grew up in the city, and I grew up just 20 miles north of New York City, so we were ready to become country people. And had I known Chuck, I know I would have appreciated him immensely, and I would have been one of the many people he invited to come and visit him on his mountain and see what he had going there. So I'm just using this outline here to make sure I don't miss anything about him. I do this a lot where I go into history and I find someone, a little something about them that intrigues me or that is interesting. It's like a hook that, with a bait on it, and I'm willing to take that and see where it takes me. A lot of times I don't know what I'm going to discover about people, but in the years that I've been involved in local history, all you have to do is begin to dig a little bit deeper, and you find out things about people that help you to answer the question, why did they do what they did? What was she doing here? What was he trying to accomplish up there? We don't know that initially, but if you begin to look in history and read about what other people experienced long ago, you begin to see a much clearer picture. So my feeling with Chuck is, not having ever known him, I needed to rely on other people to provide me with information that would create a fuller understanding of who this man was. I sensed right away someone who spent so much time living up there and developing this alternative lifestyle, as quirky as it might have been. It was quite exceptional to do that. And I thought to myself, you're not just anyone who sets about doing that. There's got to be a backstory as to why that is important enough in your life that you pursue that. So with the help of Bill Bittner, Bill, who's recording this, I discovered a lot about him through the IBM archives. And I was able to take some of the information that he provided me and some of the things that I've learned about who Chuck was and put them together to at least give you an understanding of this really wonderful person that lived in our community. So, Peter, and we're going to start back at his childhood. The first pictures that we had of him were from high school. He graduated from Homestead High School in 1951, but his story begins all the way back in 1933 when he was born. And I know enough about people who were born and experienced their childhood during the Great Depression that it was a tough time for families. Everyone was in a bind. Everyone was, trying to get by as best they could. So kids didn't have a lot of the things they have today. They had very little, in fact. And some families found a way to really survive well enough through it. And it seems that's who the Pettus family was. I don't know what Chuck's mother and father's names were, believe it or not. I know that he had a younger brother, John, and a younger sister, Mary, Naomi. But his mom and dad raised their 3 children in Homestead, PA, which was a little southeast of Pittsburgh. And in PA, you did one of 2 things for the most part. You know, you were either in the coal mines or you were a steel worker. And of course, if you were out in Pittsburgh, you were a steel worker. So that was his father's job. The interesting thing was his mother was a teacher. Now, this was 1933, and there were women teachers, but I think it's remarkable that here we have a family where both parents were working, and I think the family benefited tremendously from that. I thought right away, I thought very well of his mother, that she was educated enough, well enough, to be able to be a teacher. And my guess is that she was a very good teacher. She taught for a good part of her life. And they raised their family. We think it was in the country because there's a reference to when Chuck was a boy, something that he did in rescuing, so to speak, his younger brother. But I need to tell you before that he had a tragedy occur in his childhood because he lost his father when he was 12 years old. Now, this is 1945, the end of World War II, you know, a fairly optimistic time in this country's life. And I think it must have been extremely hard for the family to have lost the father, the children being so young. But Chuck was the oldest of the 3 children, and probably even before his father passed, he had a sense of responsibility, but he certainly had it after his dad died. And he found ways to help support the family. One thing I know of is he had a big paper route for the Pittsburgh paper. Knowing him, he found other little odd jobs to do. Again, the family was fortunate because the mother was able to teach. And getting back to the incident that occurred and leads me to believe that he learned very young to be responsible and to be able to be relied upon. They lived in, I guess, somewhat of in the country because there was a wooded area nearby their house and a creek that ran through the property. And like all kids, they loved to go out and play down by the creek. And he and his brother would do that often. But one time his younger brother went off by himself, and they had a way of crossing the creek on a fallen piece of a tree. And something must have happened, and his younger brother John fell in the water. Now, he just thought it was a muddy creek, but he couldn't get his footing. There was nothing to get his footing on, and once he did, he started to sink into the water. Now, whether it was quicksand, I don't know. Mud can be very mucky, and if you stand there long enough, I've seen this happen and felt it, you can get sucked down into that mud, and I think it must have been a very terrifying experience. John called out, screamed for his mom. She came, saw the situation, and didn't know what to do about it on her own, so she called Chuck. And when he saw what was happening, he right away thought of a solution, thought of a way to save his brother. Cut down a little sapling tree. By then a neighbor had heard the commotion and came, and between the 2 of them, they pushed that sapling out and down into the water enough so that John could grab hold of it, and they were able to push that out of the mucky water and then push him out of it. And I think just the act of that happening was enough to have the family be reassured that he was someone that they could all rely upon. I think that this was something that Scott had found, that John, later in life, in reflecting upon his brother, said that I lived in my brother's shadow. And I can probably understand that because of that experience and maybe many others. And I think Chuck not only took on the responsibility of helping the family, but I also read that he found little odd jobs for his brother and sister to do, so they were all contributing to the family. These high school pictures are wonderful. Homestead High School does not exist anymore, and I found that very interesting. So if you looked up Hempstead High School or Homestead High School, it doesn't exist anymore. There is a high school in the area, but by another name, and it was established later on. The pictures up here reflect just how important certain things in school were. On the upper left picture, that's the Honor Society. And I don't know for sure, but in that picture, I believe it's his senior year, and he probably was on the Honor Society every year. There was the band that he was in, and he also sang. And this was something that the whole family experienced. And I consider it a very significant part of a young person growing up. Chuck's mom loved music. She played the piano. She had a beautiful voice. I don't think she had to insist upon her kids learning how to play music. I think they probably wanted to learn how to play because it meant so much to her. And when you think about it, if you're living through hard times, music in your family is something that is uplifting. It brings people together. It's something that you can share. And the fact that he pursued music all of his life means that that was something he learned in childhood that stayed with him. And he had wonderful achievements in high school in music. And that's his senior class picture. And even in 1951, everyone got to say something either profound or corny or whatever. And, we have a cat come. I love that. So you can see continuously striving for A's and B's on his report, nary a D or E. He's terrific on the clarinet and sax, but when he plays, you can't relax. So he's probably a really good, lively player. So this was Chuck growing up in Homestead, PA, and his education would not end there. We can go to the next picture, but it won't be about his the time he spent at the University of Pittsburgh. This is going a little bit forward into IBM. He immediately after high school was a student at the University of Pittsburgh. He got a liberal arts degree there, and very soon after that, I don't know how soon, because he must have been a really good student, because he might have gotten through high school in 3 years. But he ended up in Binghamton. They called it SUNY Binghamton. It's what is now Binghamton University, to get his master's in civil engineering and physics. And I thought, well, there it is, that's the beginning of his moving in that direction. And it probably was part of what motivated him as a person, a larger look at life. So there he was. He had gone through undergraduate and master's degree. And then he took a job very briefly up at the, I want to get this correct. Oh, it must be on this page. He worked briefly at the Rome Air Development Corporation, located up at Griffiths Air Force Base near Rome, New York. And he was at the Strategic Air Force Base Center. And he was there, the work he did there was focused on radar development, because at that period of time, we're talking about early, mid-1950s, there was the beginning of the Cold War. And radar became very important, developing really good ways of knowing what was out there. And that lasted about 6 months until he read that IBM Endicott was opening positions in physics and engineering science. And he applied and was accepted, very enthusiastically at IBM. And in doing that, he became one of the first African Americans to work for IBM. Maybe not the first, but one of the first. And that job must have been the only job he ever needed in life, because he stayed with them from 1955 to 1992. 37 years, and when he retired from IBM. And all those years at IBM, I thought, wow, something so different from my image of this man who lived such a simple, wholesome life up on top of a mountain in West Windsor, that he would have this, important position at IBM. And the more I got to know him, the more I understood that he applied the same kind of way of looking at life to his work as he did to what he wanted out of life personally. And I just want to say on this page here, or this slide, this was the IBM band. I'm not sure about the date of that, but you can see right here, I put a circle around. That's Chuck playing the clarinet for the IBM band. That wasn't the only band he played in. He was involved in the Maine Community Band, the Southern Tier Concert Band, and he played right here on the Village Green for the town of Windsor. He was, for a number of years, a part of the Windsor Town Band, which is a wonderful thing for the community. And again, we talk about what a community-minded person he was. He shared one of the things he loved the most with the community music. And I love that idea. He also sang, and the picture up on the top right there was taken, the Broome County Council of Churches had they had what they called a festival of praise. They got singers, choir members from 15 local churches, 200 of them, to have this performance of for the Council of Churches event, and Chuck was one of the singers. And they seem to indicate that was taken early on, so he was a fairly young man then. And of course, he sang because I'm sure his mother sang, and they all sang along with her. So I think it's a wonderful tribute to him that music was such an important part of his life. I stuck that picture of him running because he's running with fellow IBM employees. I heard he never much liked running, but he did it anyhow because he knew it was good for him. It was a healthy thing to do. So unlike you, Scott, who always loved distance running, you might not have known him, but that shared love of running, or not so shared love of running, you did the same thing.
Just to point something out that someone said at a hike, because I always ask, anybody know Mr. Pettus? They said he ran in street shoes, and I'm noticing those are street shoes on him.
Yes, they are.
A little quirky,
yeah,
but there it is again.
But he was running.
Yes, he was.
So that pretty much says, it indicates a lot about who he became later on. You want to switch it, Peter? Now, I was very thankful to have Bill share so much good information with me about Chuck. And this is a lot about his professional development. And the things that I read about indicated that he had a very strong work ethic. And he believed that if you applied yourself and worked very hard at something you wanted to either learn or perfect or understand, that you had to put the time in. You had to work at it. It was the only way you were going to get to the point where you could actually say, make statements about what you had been observing and have them follow through. And this happened with him. Early on, he was an inventor. He was able to, his first invention was in 1965. He got the patent on magneto-resonant storage device, whatever that is. But it had a lot to do with things that involved work at IBM. And another patent that he had was in color photography. And there was a reference to his photographic work as well. So I don't know the nature of that patent, but this is what happens when someone studies something well enough that they are able to come up with some device that explains how something works. And that was always an objective of his. He loved to figure out how things worked. He liked to understand how things worked in nature, why things happened in nature. And he applied that same thoughtfulness to his work. Or maybe it was his work that came first, and he applied the same thoughtfulness to the natural world around him. But I think early on, he understood the same way that I approach myself professionally is how I want to experience my life. And so early on, and in this one, this article is a wonderful one because he had just recently, and it mentions here that he had received, he became the Broome County chapter president of the Professional Engineers Society, which I didn't really know existed, but it does, or did, and probably still does. And it was, maybe not in this article, but in another article was pointed out that when he received this position, when he was elected to this position, he was the first Black person in the whole world, and this was a worldwide organization, to be elected president of a chapter of that society. And that speaks volumes about his professional self. And this article, he wrote this article about you have to expand your horizons always. If you work in a place and you're just focused on the work you do, that's all you will do. But if you go to conferences, if you develop your professional interests by sharing them with other people, sharing ideas, expanding your horizon, that is the way you can accomplish the most in life. So this whole article is trying to convince people, don't go to a conference with an attitude, I'm not going to learn anything. You can bring something to a conference with the way you apply your interest. And I can imagine conferences with him, probably resulted in people there sitting down and talking and all of a sudden coming to an understanding about things. And I could not agree more with that. The more you embrace what other people are doing and share what you're doing, the more you can accomplish. And I think this was probably part of how he felt at this point as a young man about what he wanted in life. And that had to do with his personal life as well. When he first was living here and working for IBM, I was given to understand he had an apartment in Vestal, and he was already interested in a different dietary life than most people had. He was very interested in a non-meat diet, and maybe we can even move to the next. Let's move to the next one. This is more of. That was the article in the newspaper when he was made president of the Professional Engineer Society. And this is a wonderful article by Jerry Hant, and it begins to explain how he understood what he wanted in life personally, the kind of life he wanted to live. He was moving towards eating better and exercising through running. And I think he understood right from the start that he couldn't have the lifestyle he wanted living in an apartment in Vestal. He needed to find a place where he could develop the foods, he could grow the foods that he wanted to eat. He could experiment with a certain lifestyle that he had the idea might very well be a healthy lifestyle that could lead to longevity. And this is a really very good article because it talks about him personally. And when I'm closer to the conclusion, I'll let you know a little bit about the philosophy that I think he had towards the end of his life. But Jerry Hant in this article calls him an individualist and a visionary. And this article, I believe, was in 1981 it came out. And he was talking about automation and its impact on society. And he could already see at that point in time that it was going to have a significant influence in the future. He could see automation expanding to the point where there would be much that we could do using alternative or artificial intelligence. And the computer he saw as a vehicle for doing this. And I think what this reporter from the Present Sun Bulletin liked about Chuck was that he had a huge imagination, and he had a very positive attitude about the future. And he used technology as a way of seeing that the future could be extremely bright for us. But he also understood that there's a lot about technology we can't predict. And right from the start, he had a concern about what he called the emotional addiction of technology. And all I had to think of, and this is back in 1981, when maybe we had flip phones or whatever, but when you think of emotional addiction to technology, this is your best example of how that can happen. Nowadays, you don't see too many people out and about that it's either on them. If it's not in their hand, it's on them. It is, and I'm sure I'm not the only one in this room that has had the talk with grown children. Well, if you expect your children not to spend so much time on an electronic device, you have to give it up too. And it's not an easy thing to do. It really is. And as Scott will attest to, didn't have a phone for the longest time. Now it's always with us. So he understood that back then and said, you just have to understand that that's a part of it. And I experienced that with my son, and now it's an even bigger problem, and it's one that needs to be addressed. And if he was still alive, he'd probably be trying to address that. Now we're on Chuck's beloved hilltop. He was looking for a place to do what he wanted, to grow things on his land. And I thought initially there was so much made of the fact that because he had this hilltop property, that he could, if he just extended the top of the property, he could be the highest point in the whole area. I read that the highest point was somewhere way over in the town of Sanford, up in the hills there. And if he could just put, I don't know how many feet on top of his property, that he could have the tallest place in Broome County. And I thought, well, you buy a hilltop property so you can build an earthen pyramid to be the highest point. That there's got to be something more to it. So I did, thanks to Bill and the IBM archives, I discovered that among his friends were members of the Broome County Astronomical Club or Society. And when he was looking for a place to retreat to, if you want to see it that way, or at least enjoy, they were encouraging him, to look for a place high up. And when he realized that there was this place in West Windsor, they encouraged him to purchase it. Because at the time, they didn't have a high point at which to study the stars. And if you know the preserve, you'll know that even at the top of the mountain, there's trees there, trees that have never been taken down. So you have a very limited ability to look at the sky. But if you build something up above that tree line, and since you're not going to take any trees down, it's the only way to do it. And then if you did that, we can put telescopes up there, and we can observe the stars. So they call this his stairway to the stars. And they put their telescopes up there. And this must have been in the 60s, because in 1974, the Broome County Astronomical Society formed and founded the Copernic Observatory and Science Center. So one might think, here's a wonderful example. I like to think that was the reason he bought that property, is that he could help his friends have a staircase to the stars. So that's my take on it, and I'm going to stick with that one. But that's a wonderful picture of him. That's the beginning of building that wonderful earthen pyramid. He never quite made it to beat the record and be the tallest point, but he certainly has left a legacy for all of us. As you can see, that mound of dirt, this was the day of the opening of the Pettus Preserve, and I caught the picture of one lone hiker climbing up to the top. And when you get up there, you can see a lot of the sky, and it's really beautiful up there. So I wanted to share that with you because I thought that was that was so fitting of him. So I'm going to get into a little bit about how important his home up there was to him. He could have built a beautiful place up on that mountain. He chose not to do that. He really didn't want to change much of that land at all. He wanted it to remain as it was. So he lived in a trailer at the end of a gravel road, and he used his property to live on. His diet would include things that were there on his land, things that were there when he first moved there, and also plantings that he got from all over the world. He studied foods, wild plants that had edible uses, and he was extremely interested in getting the most nutrition out of the food that he could find on his land. Whatever he couldn't find on his land, he grew in greenhouses. And I know that there were people who helped him with these greenhouses. He was smart enough in that ability to figure out how things worked, to create a trench around the greenhouses to provide water for that. Everyone knows the best water you can possibly taste is water from a spring source, groundwater. And he was able to tap into a water source on his property and fill a 1,500-gallon cistern. So he always had plenty of water up there. And he said it was great water. And my husband and I, for a brief time in our lives, owned property way up in the state of Maine. And we had a spring-fed pond. And I've never tasted water like that. So I can appreciate when he found good water, it was a real treat. And he also had a pond. I love the fact that he stocked the pond from local sources. And his brother John brought some fish down from the Niagara River. I only found out recently how abundant the fish population is in the Niagara River, so I know why John went up there to get the fish. So he had greenhouse-grown foods, foods that he was able to find on his land, berries, nuts, greens, all this wonderful food. And when he was interviewed by Jerry Hant about his diet, he was very willing to say, "This is experimental on my part. I don't eat things that I don't know about. I won't eat unknown foods. I'm very careful about what I choose to eat from up here," but he would eat a wide variety of foods. And they sustained him. When Jerry asked him, "Well, how do you know you're getting enough nutrition, enough protein?" And Chuck went over, "Well, I take care of my firewood, I do this, I do that." There wasn't anything he couldn't do. And he figured, if I'm not getting proper nutrition, I just wouldn't have the stamina to do this. And so I thought, well, that's a good way of looking at it. And then in the article that Jerry had, he talked about some of the sources that he would use. The government put out bulletins about certain kinds of foods that are good to eat. And he also was looked into book sources of information. And one of the sources that he chose, that he used a lot, was a book called A Diet for a Small Planet. It was written by Frances Moore. I don't know if the last name is just Lape or whatever, but LePay. Thank you, Peter. And I said, "Oh, wait a minute, I know that book." So I went and I looked, and in our collection of books that we have had for many, many years are her books. And this was Recipe for a Small Planet, High Protein Meatless Cooking, and this was her first book. She came out with 2 books. This was, if you were interested in eating foods in their natural form, this woman was the expert. So the minute that was mentioned, I remember Peter said, we need these books because these will help us to know what we can eat from what grows around here. So this is who he was, and this is why his land meant so much to him. But he was not a solitary person. And you would think living up there and living as he did, he was just someone who would just leave me alone. I want to live my quirky life all by myself. This is not who he was at all. In one of the articles, and you can go to the next one, I hope without losing it, yeah. What began as curiosity is now a lifelong experiment. He knew that he was on to something. But he didn't want to just live up there alone and have that experiment play out in his own private world. He wanted to share it with people. He was constantly offering for people to come and visit him. And I have been informed that many, many people took him up on that. And they came from all over. They came from different states in this country and some from other parts of the world to see how he lives. And in one article, he even put his phone number. He let Jerry Hant put his phone number in the newspaper. So if you want to come up and visit, please do. And I'll show you everything that I have here. And I'll show you how I found a way to live where I don't have to be concerned about what I eat. I don't have to worry about the additives in the foods that I'm eating. And if I'm right and eating this way and exercising helps me to live longer, then that's great. And even if it doesn't, it just felt right to him. And I think at one point he went from being a vegetarian to being a vegan, which is even more serious non-meat, non-dairy product diet. And he did fine. But I love the fact that he wanted people to share this with him. And he kept repeating the idea that young people in particular, he just felt that a lot of young people didn't understand the natural world as well as maybe they did long ago. And to experience being in the country and seeing how someone else lives that lifestyle, might be inspirational for them. And if not, it was okay because it enabled him to share what was important to him in his life. And he applied the same rigorousness that he had for work in his personal life. And I think he probably ended up living the life he truly wanted to experience in being able to do that. This article goes into, and I love that picture of him with the ladder, just walking around his property, enjoying everything about it. The picture on the right here, this is wonderful because anyone who lives, in the country around here knows, it might be fine down in Binghamton, but there's a blizzard going on up on the mountains in Windsor. And he experienced this. I think that this particular dump of snow occurred when it was just raining in another part of Broome County. And that's quite a bit of snow. And there he is on his snowshoes out there. He said that he could even find food in the winter. And I thought, wow, you got to know your stuff to be able to do that. Okay. All right. Before I get into the Pettus Preserve, I'd like to speak a little bit about his sense of community. I've already mentioned how he just didn't play music. He joined bands. He was in a church choir. He, as Scott pointed out, after he retired, he bought He acquired the roller derm, the New Image roller derm in roller dome in Endwell, and his intention was not just to own a roller skating rink that kids would come to. He wanted it to be a youth development center. He wanted kids to come there, to know that there was a safe place that they could come to, they could have a good time, they could be with each other, and might grow from that experience. And it made me start to think about my own son, and how the roller rink in West Windsor was everything. It's where you met your friends. And I thought that that's a wonderful thing for someone to have such a strong feeling about the youth of a community that he would do that. I wonder if he thought about his own youth and how important it was to know that there were people who cared, who understood, and wanted to give back to you. Just an amazing example of community-mindedness. He could have done anything else when he retired. Such a successful person from IBM, and he chose to do that. Unfortunately, couldn't keep up with the building repairs, and eventually, like a lot of these wonderful places, it had to close down. But that probably was a thought that he had when he realized that there was something that he could do with the thing he loved the most, his land in West Windsor. I would think that at a certain point, later in his life, he wanted to see it become a legacy. He somehow or other didn't want it to just pass into someone else's hands. This place that he had left pristine, that he wanted to remain forever wild, if he sold it to someone else, that might not happen. Something might happen that is the complete opposite of what he wanted for that land. So to ensure that that would happen, he partnered with Waterman. He saw in Waterman Conservation and Education Center an opportunity to reach out to all people, but particularly young people, and give them the chance to come onto his land, to hike the pathways, to look at the natural world up there and understand it a little bit better. It just seemed to me as if it was a wonderful bringing together of conservancy and education. And I really thought, what a marvelous thing for him to do. And that's exactly what he did do. And when he passed away in 2013, and his will was read, Waterman got the 105 acres up on top of the hill. The beautiful piece of property that he had bought all those years before from Alvy Bullock, and it was going to be what he wanted it to be. But he wanted to be there. And so the following spring, he was laid to rest at the base of the wonderful stairway to the stars in a titanium casket, and he came home. He came home to the place that he wanted to be. And I have to say, I envy him that he is exactly where he wanted to be forever, in the place he loves so much. And within 5 years, 6 years of that happening, 5 years of that happening, the Pettus Preserve, the Pettus Hill Preserve, had a wonderful opening day in May of 2019. And I remember it well. I worked for the Windsor Standard, and at that point in time, I knew about the preserve being opened. I have to say this, that I will never forget the town hall, the Windsor Town Hall, not town hall, the Windsor Town meeting, because the town of Windsor was involved in this whole effort to acknowledge the opening of this preserve. And I remember at that point in time, I don't know if Scott had expressed the interest in it or not, but I remember Carolyn Price saying, "We've got the perfect job for you, Scott." And I thought, isn't that wonderful? And I couldn't agree more with her. To make someone who loved the outdoors, who hiked, who ran, who appreciated nature, to make him a steward of that preserve was a very smart idea. But what it also indicated, as you can see here, the community embraced the opening of this preserve. They understood how important it was. They understood what a magnificent gift Chuck was giving, not just to the community, but to everyone. And the day was absolutely beautiful. The Boy Scout Troop 68, under the leadership of the late Ron Rambo, a wonderful person. One of his Eagle Scouts built the shelter up on the Pettus Hill Preserve, a wonderful place where you can get in out of the rain and maybe read what's going on or just shelter there. I took pictures prior to that of the preserve. There's that vernal pond, the pathway going up to the top of the highest point on his hill. And that's not a very good picture, the one on the far left at the bottom, but when you got to the base of the hill and you walked out a little, there's a rocky ledge. Now, there's trees, but if you go there when the leaves are off the trees, you can see the wonderful expanse of landscape beyond that, of the hills beyond that. And I say here, the Windsor community came out on opening day, marking the beginning of a shared recognition of Charles Pettus and his love of the land and the people. And he famously said, "I love nature the way it is. Tell everyone to come up." And that's what we've done. Thanks to Waterman and the community, we have this beautiful preserve. And in conclusion, I just want to say that he talked to Jerry Hant from the press about something very profound, I thought. And I think Jerry Hant must have had Chuck in his Rolodex, because whenever Jerry wanted to understand technology, and when IBM was big here in Broome County, that was always of interest. And you always went to some people at IBM to get a sense of what was going on. And so often he went to Chuck to get his answers. And at one point, Chuck talked to him, and I want to do this justice, so I'm not going to just speak without looking at some of this. During his entire lifespan, I believe he was constantly moving toward what he called complete truth. And the way it was explained, it is not truths, not this truth or that truth, not a personal sense of truth. But in this world, there is a complete whole truth, that even though we don't understand it, it is essentially irrefutable. But there's the only one way you're going to be able to get there. And he said he believed that mankind was given reason to use in search of complete truth, that the interrelated disciplines of logic and mathematics are tools for truth seekers. to gain understanding of the natural world and to discover how things worked. He studied the mechanisms of life. And I think he was able, up on that mountain, to finally know what complete truth was. He came as close to it, I think, as we can. I believe he lived his life. I believe that how he lived his life and what he did for a living were linked in a way that very few of us are able to accomplish. We have our work world, we have our personal world, and a lot of times we can't have that overriding sense of who we are influence both of them in a cooperative way. And I think that he found that. And to me, he will and always remain a person who gave of himself to others, who overcame incredible obstacles. Now, I haven't talked about that to them tonight because I really feel that to talk about who he was and what he did, you have to just look at him as an extremely wonderful, exceptional human being. Maybe quirky in the process, but certainly an exceptional human being. And I was very fortunate to be able to share his story with you tonight. So thank you very much for listening.
In 2013, Chuck Pettus' beloved property was bequeathed to the Waterman Conservation Education Center. Beginning in 2016, the over 105-acre parcel of forever wild green space set up as a conservancy became known officially as the Pettus Hill Preserve. If you or your family or friends choose to visit this site, which was Mr. Pettus's and is the Waterman Center's intent, you will find a small parking lot and a topographical map of the 4 hiking trails, which total roughly 3 miles. There's a shelter for relaxing or inclement weather close to the entrance. At the end of Chuck's Memorial Ridge Trail, you will find an old stone foundation, a vernal pool, a very unique earthen pyramid, elevation 1,985.5 feet. Mr. Pettus tried to make his earthen pyramid the highest point in Broome County, but came up about 100 feet short. But by arranging to have himself buried in a titanium casket at the base of his pyramid, he inadvertently became what we believe to be the highest modern burial site in Broome County, New York. As someone who knew him said, Chuck would like that. For the video portion, we are extremely fortunate to have located his brother, John, who said in 2014 when Chuck was buried, and I quote, "While there's a lot of self-centeredness in the world today, Chuck was truly focused on others. He was extreme in his degree of optimism. His intent was always the betterment of others." And for the video, I introduce Chuck Pettus' brother, John Pettus. Welcome to the video, John.
How do you do, Scott?
I'm doing just fine. So where was the family home?
Our family home was in Homestead, Pennsylvania, just a little bit southeast of Pittsburgh.
As I remember, your family suffered a tragedy when your father passed away.
Yes.
And Chuck was 12 years old. And you said to me that Chuck almost immediately assumed head of household responsibilities or role.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually, he later received his master's degree in physics and civil engineering at
At
Binghamton.
Binghamton, yes. quite a few engineers went from Rome Air Development down to IBM for interviews, and Charles was the one that they selected to hire.
Your brother was a physicist, engineer, musician, naturalist, hiker, runner, vegan. And my question to you is, and you can expand if you would like, and the important question is, how would your brother want to be remembered?
I think you could talk to anybody, and they would give you a story having to do with their relationship, which is what my relationship is, more than just a brother. I mean, he meant more to me. And of course, all the stories I have that about life that we shared, the information that we shared, what I learned by knowing not only my brother, but this other person, this other part of humanity that did these unique things. All of these different things, some of which I tried to copy and do myself. It's a long story.
So anyway, one of the things you mentioned when we had the hike, the recent hike for the Office of the Aging, was that either you or your wife suggested
It was my wife suggested that he turn the property over to Nature Conservancy.
to a conservancy.
Which was a very good idea.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Oh, he was unique. That's very good description. Oh, I remember one time, it was before the days of cell phones, so he called me and told me he was going to go up to the top of his pyramid and look we're almost in line with the airport for him.
Right.
He looked in this direction, and I went on the roof with a big mirror, and I made reflections in that direction. And later, when he got down to the trailer where he could use the phone, he called and said he could see the flashes of light.
Well.
Yeah.
This was his property. He loved this property. He really loved it. I mean, he looked every day. I mean, every day you'd see him out looking for something different out on the property, either feeding the birds out of his hands. That was neat. My wife says, he's feeding them birds out of his hand. I go, yeah, they all like him. I don't know how we got on the subject of the funeral being up on that hill. But
How that actually
how that started. The funeral director come up to me that one day and says, how we could get him up on the top of his hill? I go, you're gonna what? He goes, yeah, he wants to be buried on top of his hill. Yeah, if anybody wants to go up, they should take a walk up there and
it's
he has preserved all his life, basically.
Yeah.
He bought that when he was a young man. I don't know how many years he had it. I don't want to say because I'm not sure.
Yeah, my resources said early 60s.
60s he bought
when
it?
he bought it, yeah.
So I introduce by voice Chuck Pettus' brother, John Pettus.
Knowing Chuck was its own reward. Chuck had the ability to reflect goodness. That goodness was something that we found within ourselves. So knowing Chuck gave you the opportunity to see yourself and to see the goodness that he reflected.
So again, the other portion of that question was, and I think I expressed and I probably shouldn't say it this way, a little discomfort in talking about race,
Yes.
because you and your brother are black men, and how, uh, you know, how if we were approached, how he would want to be remembered as a human being. And I think a couple of times you had mentioned that he just wanted to be remembered as a human being.
As
But
a
there's-
human
yeah,
being, sure, because that's how we saw and experienced ourselves.
Absolutely.
We were just other beings
Yes.
interacting with the world.
And trying to make the world a better
World
place
a better place for all of us.
for all of us, for